Maya-chan pressed her face against the small window of the transport ship. Below her stretched the most beautiful sight she had ever seen. The Galactic Academy of Sciences, set like a glittering jewel on the surface of Kepler 442b. Tall crystal towers reached toward the purple sky, connected by floating bridges that seemed to defy gravity. Gardens of alien plants created colorful patterns between the buildings. Everything looked perfect and impossibly advanced. Her stomach twisted with nervousness. In just a few hours, she would be walking through those halls as the first human student ever accepted to the academy. 3 years ago, humans had made first contact with the galaxy. 3 years ago, most people on Earth didn't even know aliens existed. Now here she was, a 16-year-old girl from San Francisco, about to study alongside the brightest minds from dozens of different worlds. The transport ship landed with barely a whisper. Maya grabbed her single bag and walked down the ramp. The air on Kepler 442b tasted different than Earth air. Cleaner somehow, with a slight metallic tang that made her nose wrinkle. The gravity felt lighter too, making each step feel like a small bounce. Other students were arriving at the same time. Maya stared in wonder at her new classmates. A group of crystalline beings floated past her, their bodies catching the light like living diamonds. These had to be the HFY she had read about. Their crystalline structures stored information perfectly, never forgetting anything they learned. A cloud of glowing gas drifted by, occasionally forming into a roughly humanoid shape. The Nephilim, she realized. They could process information at the speed of light itself. How was she supposed to compete with that? Insect-like creatures with 6 arms and compound eyes chittered to each other in a language that sounded like music. The Zephyrians worked together like parts of a single mind. And towering over everyone else were the Drachmori, tall reptilian beings with scales that shifted color based on their moods. Their race was famous for strategic thinking and leadership. Maya suddenly felt very small and very human. A floating screen appeared in front of her, displaying text in perfect English. Maya-chan, human room assignment 47 Delta. Your roommate is Kreshta of the HFY. Please proceed to dormitory tower 7. The dormitory room was larger than Maya had expected. 2 sleeping areas were separated by a common space filled with study equipment she didn't recognize. One side of the room already looked lived in. Crystals of different sizes and colors were arranged in precise patterns on shelves and tables. Her roommate materialized in the doorway. Kreshta stood nearly 7 feet tall, her body made of what looked like blue-white crystal. When she moved, light danced through her structure, creating beautiful patterns. When she spoke, her voice sounded like wind chimes. "So you are the human," Kreshta said. There was no warmth in her voice. I had hoped the stories were exaggerated. I see they were not. "Nice to meet you too," Maya said, trying to smile. "I'm Maya. I know who you are. Everyone knows. You are the experiment." Kreshta's light patterns shifted to a colder blue. "Please keep your primitive belongings on your side of the room. I do not wish them to contaminate my study space." Maya felt her cheeks burn. She had practiced this conversation dozens of times during the long journey to Kepler 442b. None of her practice versions had gone this badly. "I'm here to learn." "Just like you," she said quietly. "No," Kreshta replied. "You are here because your species made contact and the council decided they needed to appear welcoming. There is a difference between belonging somewhere and being allowed somewhere." With that cheerful welcome, Kreshta glided to her side of the room and began arranging her crystals. Each one chimed softly when she touched it, creating a complex melody that probably meant something important. Maya unpacked her few belongings and tried not to cry. The next morning, orientation took place in the Great Hall. Hundreds of students from dozens of species filled floating seats that arranged themselves in perfect rows. Maya sat alone while everyone else clustered with their own kind. She felt like a single black dot on a white page. Dean Vorthik took the stage. He was a Drakmori, nearly 8 feet tall, with dark green scales that shifted to intimidating shades of red as he spoke. His voice boomed across the hall without any amplification. Welcome, students, to the 500th year of the Galactic Academy of Sciences. You represent the finest young minds from across known space. You have been chosen because your species has demonstrated excellence in learning, innovation, and advancement. His large golden eyes swept across the crowd and stopped on Maya. This year, we also have an unusual addition. Miss Chen represents humanity's first attempt at galactic-level education. We shall see if this experiment proves worthwhile. Maya sank lower in her floating chair. Every eye in the hall seemed focused on her. She heard whispers in languages she didn't understand, but the tone was clear enough. Doubt, curiosity, some amusement. Your classes begin tomorrow, Dean Vorthik continued. Remember, this academy maintains the highest standards in the galaxy. We do not lower our expectations for anyone, regardless of their species limitations. That evening, Maya sat in the library trying to understand her class schedule. Multidimensional mathematics, quantum physics, advanced xenobiology, galactic history, and something called theoretical reality manipulation. The titles alone made her head spin. Other students moved around her like she didn't exist. When she tried to ask a Nephilim student for help finding a book, the cloud of gas simply drifted away without responding. A group of Zephyrians chittered what sounded like laughter when she struggled to operate a holographic display. Only one student approached her that first night. Another human would have been too much to hope for, but she was still disappointed when a small, furry creature with enormous eyes introduced himself. I am Pip, he said in heavily accented English. I am. How you say. Also not popular here. Why not? Maya asked. My species, the Floon, we are new too. Only 50 years in the galaxy. Still considered primitive by most. He gestured with a tiny paw at the other students. But not as primitive as humans, they tell me. Maya laughed, surprising herself. Well, that's something, I guess. Perhaps we can be primitive together, Pip suggested with what might have been a smile as Maya fell asleep that night. She listened to Kreshta's crystals singing softly on the other side of the room. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, but it reminded her of how far she was from home. How far she was from everything familiar and safe. Tomorrow, the real challenge would begin. Tomorrow, she would have to prove that humans belonged among the stars. Or fail trying. 3 months had passed since Maya arrived at the academy, and she was barely surviving. Every day brought new challenges that seemed designed to make her fail. In multidimensional mathematics, she could only think in 3 dimensions, while her classmates visualized spaces her brain couldn't even imagine. Quantum physics required processing speeds. That made her feel like she was thinking through thick mud. But something strange had started happening. In survival simulations, Maya began showing abilities that confused her instructors. When the holographic environment presented an unexpected problem, other students would analyze it logically, run calculations, and propose theoretical solutions. Maya would just do something. She would grab random materials and build things that worked. Even when she couldn't explain why. During a xenobiology practicum studying the life cycles of crystal-based organisms, Maya had suggested that the creatures might reproduce through harmonic resonance rather than cellular division. Professor Zenakara, a Nephilim instructor, had dismissed the idea as primitive intuition. 2 days later, lab results proved Maya correct. The professor had not been pleased. These small successes made Maya's failures hurt even more. She could see that she had something valuable to offer, but most of her classmates and instructors couldn't see past her. Human limitations. The worst part was the growing hostility around her. What had started as dismissive tolerance was becoming active dislike. Students would go quiet when she approached. Study groups would suddenly become full when she asked to join. Someone had started leaving anonymous notes on her desk, calling her a contamination and demanding she return to her primitive mudball. Maya found refuge in the library, often staying until the early hours of the morning. Pip would sometimes join her, but he had his own studies to worry about. Mostly, she sat alone among towering shelves of data crystals and holographic books, trying to absorb information fast enough to keep up. It was during one of these late-night sessions that she first noticed Professor Zentara watching her. Zentara was of X-High, like Maya's roommate Kreshta, but older and more elaborate. Her crystal body contained swirling patterns of gold and silver that spoke of advanced age and accumulated knowledge. She taught advanced xenobiology and was rumored to be one of the most brilliant minds at the academy. "Miss Chun," Professor Zentara said one evening, materializing beside Maya's study table, "you spend considerable time here." "I need the extra study time," Maya admitted. "Everything takes me longer to understand." Indeed. The professor's light patterns shifted to what Maya had learned, indicated deep thought. "Tell me, do you truly believe your species belongs at this level of education?" Maya looked up, surprised by the direct question. Yes. I think humans can contribute something valuable. We see things differently." "Differently," Zentara repeated. "Yes. I have observed your different approaches. Your tendency to ignore logical analysis in favor of instinctive responses. Your species' chaotic thought patterns." She paused, her crystals darkening. "Do you not think such differences might be dangerous to academic progress?" "I think differences make us stronger," Maya said. Though her voice came out smaller than she intended, Professor Zentara's patterns shifted to what looked like amusement. "How charmingly primitive. Tell me, Miss Chen, are you familiar with our holographic training systems?" Maya nodded. Every student had to complete simulation exercises in the holorooms. They were incredibly realistic virtual environments where students could practice everything from emergency repairs to diplomatic negotiations. There is a particular simulation that all first-year students must complete, the professor continued. It involves exploring an abandoned space station and documenting any discoveries. Quite routine, really. Perhaps it is time for you to attempt this exercise. Something in the professor's tone made Maya nervous, but she couldn't pinpoint what. "When would I do this?" "Tomorrow evening would be suitable. I can arrange for you to have exclusive access to Holoroom 7 during the maintenance period. You would not be disturbed by other students." After Professor Zentara left, Maya tried to focus on her studies, but something bothered her. Why would she need exclusive access? Why during maintenance? And why had the professor seemed so pleased when Maya agreed? Unknown to Maya, Professor Zentara was holding a very different conversation across the academy. She stood in her private chambers, surrounded by other students and one junior faculty member. Kreshta was there, along with several Zephyrians, 2 Nephilim, and a young Drakmori named Tekalon. "The human grows more disruptive each day," Zentara announced. "Her instinctive solutions challenge established scientific methods. Her presence undermines the logical foundation of our educational system. She scored higher than most of us on the last survival simulation," Tekalon pointed out, his scale shifting to uncertain colors. "Exactly the problem," Zentara replied. "Her success validates primitive thinking over proper analysis. If the Academy accepts this, what message does that send to the galaxy? That chaos is equivalent to order? That instinct equals intelligence?" Kreshta's crystals resonated with agreement. Her very presence in our dormitory is disturbing. She contaminates the learning environment with her emotional responses and illogical behavior patterns. The solution is simple, Zenthara continued. The human must be removed from the academy. If she leaves voluntarily, the problem solves itself. If she suffers an unfortunate accident during training, she let the implication hang in the air. What kind of accident? Asked one of the Nephilim students, its gaseous form swirling nervously. Zenthara smiled, an expression that looked terrifying on her crystal features. The holographic training systems have safety protocols, of course. But during maintenance periods, those protocols are temporarily offline. If someone were to access the system during such a time, and if the simulation were modified to present real dangers instead of holographic ones, you're talking about murder, Teklan said, his scales flashing red with alarm. I'm talking about protecting the integrity of galactic education, Zenthara corrected. The human is a contamination. Contaminations must be cleansed. What if she survives? Kreshta asked. She won't, Zenthara said with certainty. Humans are fragile creatures from a primitive world. They have no real experience with the hazards of space travel or advanced technology. The simulation I have designed will present challenges that would tax even a Drakmore warrior or a Vex High scholar. A human child will not survive. The group spent the next hour planning the details. They would modify the abandoned space station simulation to include real environmental hazards, actual radiation, genuine gravity fluctuations, and structural elements that could really collapse. They would disable the emergency abort systems and ensure that Maya entered the simulation alone. To the Academy's monitoring systems, it would look like a routine training accident, a tragic malfunction during maintenance. The first human student, killed by technology she was too primitive to understand. As the conspirators left to prepare for their plan, none of them noticed the small figure hiding in the ventilation shaft above. Pip had been returning from his own late-night studies when he heard voices in Professor Zenthara's chambers. What he heard made his large eyes grow even wider with fear. He wanted to run directly to Maya and warn her, but he knew she wouldn't believe such an incredible story without proof. Besides, by the time he could convince anyone in authority, it would be too late. Instead, Pip began formulating his own plan. If these advanced beings thought they could murder his only friend at the academy, they were about to learn something important about underestimating primitive species. The next evening, Maya made her way to Halorum 7, unaware that she was walking into a carefully constructed trap. She was nervous about the simulation, but also excited. Finally, a chance to prove herself without competing directly against abilities she couldn't match. As she reached for the door controls, she had no idea that the next few hours would change everything about how the galaxy viewed humanity. Maya stepped into Halorum 7 and felt the familiar tingling sensation as the simulation systems activated around her. The room dissolved, replaced by the interior of what appeared to be an abandoned space station. Emergency lighting cast red shadows across twisted metal corridors. The air tasted stale and metallic, exactly what she would expect from a derelict facility. Begin documentation of Station Omega 7, she said aloud, activating her recording device as instructed. Initial observation: structural damage consistent with emergency evacuation. Proceeding to investigate. The simulation felt incredibly realistic, even by Academy standards. As Maya moved through the corridors, debris crunched under her feet with satisfying authenticity. When she touched a damaged wall panel, it felt genuinely cold and rough. The Academy's holographic technology was impressive, but this seemed somehow more real than usual. Maya had been exploring for about 20 minutes when the first sign of trouble appeared. A section of ceiling collapsed behind her, cutting off her retreat route. She spun around, watching chunks of metal crash to the floor with impacts that shook the station. "That's not supposed to happen," she muttered. In previous simulations, environmental hazards were always announced beforehand or triggered by specific student actions. This had come from nowhere. She tried to activate her emergency communicator to contact the instructors monitoring the simulation. Static filled her earpiece. That definitely wasn't supposed to happen. All Academy simulations maintained constant communication links for safety. Maya felt her first spike of real fear as she realized something was very wrong. She continued forward because she had no choice. But now she moved with different awareness. Her senses, which had been casually engaged with what she thought was a harmless exercise, suddenly sharpened to full alertness. Every sound, every shadow, every shift in air pressure registered in her consciousness. This heightened awareness saved her life when the next trap triggered. A section of floor gave way beneath her feet, but Maya's reflexes, honed by years of skateboarding and rock climbing back on Earth, kicked in instantly. She threw herself sideways, catching the edge of solid flooring and pulling herself to safety. Below, she glimpsed a genuine pit filled with twisted metal spikes that would have impaled her. "Okay," Maya said to herself, heart hammering. "Either this is the most realistic simulation ever, or I'm in real danger." She examined the collapsed floor section more carefully. The metal edges were genuinely sharp, not the harmless holographic approximations used in training. When she picked up a piece of debris and threw it at the wall, it struck with a solid thunk and left a real dent. "This isn't a simulation," she whispered. "They're trying to kill me." For a moment, Maya felt overwhelmed by the enormity of what was happening. Someone at the academy, someone she trusted to educate her, had set up an elaborate trap to murder her. The unfairness of it, the casual cruelty, made her want to sit down and cry instead. Something deeper kicked in. Something that had been bred into humanity over millions of years of surviving on a planet that constantly tried to kill everything living on it. Maya's ancestors hadn't conquered Earth by being stronger than predators or faster than prey. They had survived by being adaptable, resourceful, and absolutely relentless when threatened. They had hunted mammoths across frozen tundra, crossed oceans in tiny boats, and built cities in deserts. They had taken a hostile world and made it theirs through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. That genetic heritage suddenly activated in Maya's mind like a switch being flipped. She began moving through the station with systematic efficiency. Instead of documenting her findings, she started cataloging resources and threats. Her perspective shifted from student to survivor, from explorer to hunter. When the station's artificial gravity began fluctuating wildly, slamming her against walls and ceilings, Maya didn't panic. She remembered her physics lessons about gravitational fields and began timing the fluctuations. After observing the pattern for several minutes, she realized she could predict the gravity shifts and use them to her advantage. Maya found herself laughing as she used a gravity reversal to launch herself up through a damaged section of ceiling. That would have been impossible to climb normally. The sound of her own laughter in the empty station was slightly unhinged, but it felt good to embrace the insanity of her situation. The radiation levels began spiking as Maya moved deeper into the station. Warning lights flashed, and her borrowed academy detector started clicking frantically. This was the trap meant to kill her slowly if the physical hazards didn't work. But Maya had grown up reading about human space exploration, learning how the early astronauts had dealt with similar problems using creativity and determination. She began tearing apart the station's interior, looking for materials. Lead line panels from computer systems became improvised shielding. Emergency oxygen canisters were repurposed as tools for breaking through walls. A damaged environmental suit, too large for her human frame, became a radiation protective cape when she cut it apart and rewrapped it around herself. Maya's approach would have horrified her alien instructors. She wasn't following any established protocols or procedures. She wasn't calculating optimal solutions or analyzing probability matrices. She was improvising, adapting, and solving problems through pure creative stubbornness. But it was working. As she moved deeper into the station, Maya began finding evidence of sabotage. Control panels that had been deliberately damaged. Safety systems that had been bypassed. This wasn't a malfunctioning simulation. It was an elaborate murder weapon. The discovery filled Maya with cold anger. Not the hot rage that would have made her careless, but the patient fury of a predator who had been threatened and was now hunting back. She found the station's security center and began working on the damaged computer systems. Here, her human intuition proved invaluable. While alien species might approach computer repair through logical analysis of every component, Maya simply started connecting things in ways that looked right. Her pattern recognition abilities evolved from millions of years of reading natural environments. Let her see relationships in the technology that weren't immediately obvious. After an hour of work that would have taken alien technicians days of careful analysis, Maya had restored partial power to the security systems. Camera feeds flickered to life throughout the station, showing her exactly where her would-be killers were watching from. Through the grainy security monitors, she could see them. Professor Zentara and several students gathered in a shielded control room, watching her struggle. They looked confident, satisfied, even amused. They thought they were watching a primitive human slowly dying in their clever trap. Maya smiled, and it wasn't a nice expression. They had underestimated her completely. They had assumed human weaknesses without considering human strengths. They had built their trap to exploit what they saw as primitive limitations, not realizing they had cornered the galaxy's most dangerous predator. Maya began moving toward the control room with purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was hunting, and the prey she was hunting had just realized their mistake. Through the security feeds, she watched their confidence start to change to concern, then worry, then fear as they realized their victim was systematically dismantling their death trap and heading directly toward them. The real lesson was about to begin. Maya studied the security monitors with predatory focus. The control room where her attackers waited was 3 levels up and heavily shielded. Getting there would require passing through more of their death traps. But Maya was no longer thinking like a victim trying to escape. She was thinking like a hunter who had found her prey. She activated the station's communication system and began psychological warfare. "Hello, Professor Zentara." Maya's voice echoed through the control room speakers. The conspirators jumped, startled by the unexpected communication. "I know you're watching me. I know what you've done." Through the security feeds, Maya watched their reactions. Professor Zentara's crystal patterns shifted to rapid, anxious configurations. Kreshta began resonating with harmonic frequencies that indicated stress. The Zephyrians clustered together, their compound eyes darting nervously. "Impossible," Professor Zentara said to her companions. "The communication systems were disabled." "I fixed them," Maya replied, having accessed their audio feed. Turns out human intuition is pretty good at jury-rigging alien technology. Who knew? Maya began moving through the station again, but now she moved with purpose beyond mere survival. She had studied each species' psychological profiles during her preparation for the academy. She knew their fears, their instincts, their weaknesses. For the Vex High, who valued logic and perfection above all else, Maya began demonstrating the fundamental flaws in their plan. "You know what's fascinating, Kreshta?" Maya's voice followed her roommate through the speakers. "I've run the calculations on your murder plot. The probability of success was actually only 63%, even if I had been a normal human. But I'm not normal, am I? I'm the human who scored highest in survival scenarios. The one who solved problems you couldn't. Did you factor that into your probability matrix? Kreshta's harmonic resonance became increasingly agitated. For a being whose species prided itself on perfect logic, being told that their careful plan was fundamentally flawed was psychologically devastating. Maya targeted the Zephyrians next. Their hive mind coordination was their greatest strength, but also their biggest vulnerability. She began systematically disrupting the station's environmental controls, creating electromagnetic interference that made it difficult for the insect-like beings to maintain their mental connections. Feeling a little disconnected? Maya asked as she watched them through the security feeds. Humans learned to function as individuals millions of years ago. We don't need a hive mind to think. But you do, don't you? How does it feel to be alone with your thoughts? The Zephyrians began chittering in distress, their usual coordination breaking down as the interference isolated them from each other. For the Nephilim students, Maya had a different approach. Their gaseous forms could process information at incredible speeds, but they had never learned to deal with truly unpredictable variables. Maya began randomly activating and deactivating station systems in patterns that had no logical basis. "I bet you're trying to predict what I'll do next," she said. "Running probability calculations, analyzing behavior patterns. Here's the thing about humans. We don't always do the logical thing. Sometimes we do something completely random just because we feel like it." She triggered a completely unnecessary alarm in a distant section of the station, then immediately shut it off. Opened and closed airlock doors in a pattern that spelled out "surprise" in Morse code. Activated the cafeteria's food preparation systems for no reason at all. The Nephilim students began swirling frantically, their processing speeds working against them as they tried to analyze patterns that didn't exist. But Maya saved her most devastating attack for last. She had been studying the schematics of the station while she moved, and she had realized something important. This wasn't just a holographic training facility. This was a real decommissioned space station that the Academy used for advanced simulations. It had real systems, real power sources, real weapons, and Maya had just figured out how to turn all of it against her attackers. "Professor Zenthara," Maya said, her voice now coming from speakers throughout the station simultaneously. "You made one critical error in your plan. You assumed I would think like you. Analyze the situation logically. Look for the safest escape route. Try to minimize risk." Maya was now 3 levels below the control room, working rapidly on a massive power junction. Her hands moved with confidence born of desperation and human intuition, connecting systems in ways that would have horrified a trained engineer, but somehow worked perfectly. "But humans don't think like that when we're threatened," Maya continued. "We think like the apex predators we evolved to be. And you know what apex predators do when something tries to kill them?" Maya completed her modifications to the power system and stepped back, grinning with satisfaction. Throughout the station, lights began flickering in ominous patterns. They hung back. Maya triggered her improvised system, and the station came alive around her like a weapon in her hands. Every security door in the control room level sealed simultaneously. The artificial gravity in their section increased to 3 times normal, forcing the conspirators to the floor. Emergency alarms began blaring in frequency patterns, specifically chosen to cause discomfort in each alien species present. But Maya wasn't trying to kill them. She could have easily. The station's life support systems, waste disposal, even the lighting could be weaponized with the right modifications. Instead, she was demonstrating something far more terrifying: the ability to turn their own advanced technology against them while showing restraint. The really scary part, Maya's voice echoed through the trapped control room, is that I'm not even trying to hurt you. I could have vented your atmosphere, overloaded your electromagnetic shields, or fed you into the waste recycling system. But I didn't. Do you know why? Professor Zentara, pressed against the floor by the increased gravity, could barely speak. Why? She managed. Because despite what you think about humans, we're not monsters, Maya replied. We're capable of incredible violence. Yes. We evolved on a world where everything tried to kill us, and we became better killers than all of it. But we're also capable of mercy, of choosing not to use that violence, even when we have every right to. Maya began making her way toward the control room, moving through the station like she owned it. Every door opened for her. Every system responded to her commands. She had turned the death trap into her personal domain. That's the lesson you were supposed to learn today, she continued. Not that humans are weak or primitive or unworthy, but that we're dangerous allies to have, and even more dangerous enemies to make. The choice of which one we become has always been yours. Maya reached the control room door and found it sealed by her own modifications. She could hear panicked voices from within, speaking in multiple alien languages. They knew she was coming, and they knew she could kill them all whenever she wanted. Instead, Maya sat down in the corridor outside and began working on her final surprise. Not a weapon, but something that would change everything about how the galaxy viewed humanity. She was going to give them proof of what humans could really do when they stopped pretending to be something they weren't. The hunt was almost over. Now came the most important part, deciding what to do with the prey. Maya sat in the corridor outside the control room, working calmly on a portable data pad she had salvaged from the station's wreckage. Her fingers moved with steady precision as she compiled evidence from the security systems, communication logs, and maintenance records. Everything the conspirators had done, every modification they had made to turn the simulation into a death trap, was being documented and prepared for transmission. Inside the control room, her would-be killers argued in panicked whispers. The increased gravity made movement difficult, and the sealed doors reminded them constantly that they were completely at Maya's mercy. She could hear Professor Zentara trying to maintain authority over the group, but her crystalline voice carried notes of fear that made her attempts at leadership sound hollow. The transmission relay is still functional, Maya announced cheerfully. I'm uploading everything to the Academy's main servers right now. Security footage, audio recordings, system modification logs. The whole story. She paused in her work to address them directly. You know, the really funny thing is that you almost had a point. Humans are dangerous. We are unpredictable. Our ways of thinking can disrupt established systems. You just drew completely the wrong conclusions. Maya finished her upload and activated the control room's communication system. There, Dean Vorthik and the entire Academy Council now have complete evidence of your little murder plot. I expect they'll be here soon to collect you. What do you want? Professor Zenthar's voice came through the speakers, tight with controlled fear. Maya stood up and brushed dust off her Academy uniform. Despite everything she had been through, she looked remarkably composed. I want you to understand something important. I could have killed all of you. Humans have been war makers for our entire evolutionary history. We turn tools into weapons, hunts into battles, and competitions into wars. When something threatens us, our first instinct is often to eliminate the threat permanently. She began walking around the control room, speaking to the sealed door as if she were giving a lecture. But we also learned something else during our evolution. We learned that the most powerful weapon isn't the ability to destroy your enemies. It's the ability to turn enemies into allies. Maya activated the door controls, beginning to slowly normalize the environmental conditions in the control room. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to face Academy discipline for attempted murder. But I'm not going to demand your expulsion or criminal prosecution. The conspirators inside looked, at each other in confusion as the gravity returned to normal, and the emergency alarms stopped blaring. Instead, Maya continued, I'm going to suggest something much more educational. An exchange program. You're going to spend next semester on Earth, studying human culture and education methods firsthand. Professor Zenthar's crystalline patterns shifted to what Maya had learned indicated shock. That's impossible. Earth is a primitive world with inadequate facilities for galactic standard education. Maya laughed, and the sound carried genuine amusement. That's exactly the kind of thinking that got you into this mess? You assumed primitive meant inferior. You never considered that different might mean valuable. The control room door finally unsealed with a soft hiss. Maya stepped inside to face the group that had tried to murder her. They looked smaller now, less threatening. Fear had diminished them in ways that made their previous arrogance seem petty and foolish. Earth might not have crystal knowledge matrices or quantum processing centers, Maya said, walking among them like a teacher addressing students. But we have something you've never learned to value. We have diversity of thought. We have creativity born from necessity. We have the ability to find solutions that pure logic can't reach. Dean Vorthik arrived with Academy security just as Maya was explaining her proposal. The massive Drakmori filled the doorway, his scales shifting through rapid color changes as he processed the situation. He had reviewed Maya's uploaded evidence during his journey to the station, and his expression showed the controlled fury of an educator who had discovered attempted murder in his institution. Miss Chun, he said, his voice carefully modulated. Are you injured? No, sir, Maya replied. Shaken up, but fine. They built a good trap, but they didn't really understand what they were trying to catch. Dean Vorthik's golden eyes swept over the conspirators. Professor Zenthara, you and your collaborators will be detained pending a full council investigation. Attempted murder of a student is a crime that could result in permanent exile from the galactic community. Dean Vorthik, Maya interjected. I'd like to request that you consider my alternative proposal instead. Maya outlined her exchange program idea while the dean listened with growing interest. The conspirators would be sent to Earth not as punishment, but as education. They would study in human schools, live with human families, and experience firsthand the creativity and adaptability that came from diversity. You want to reward their attempt to murder you by giving them a cultural experience? Dean Vorthik asked, his scales shifting to colors Maya couldn't interpret. I want to show them why their attempt failed, Maya corrected. They tried to kill me because they saw human differences as contamination. I want them to understand that those differences are actually strengths. 6 months later, Maya stood in the Academy's graduation hall as valedictorian of her class. The achievement would have been remarkable for any student, but for a human in her first year, it was unprecedented. Her speech to the assembled students and faculty was broadcast across the galaxy, translated into hundreds of languages for species from thousands of worlds. But the most attentive audience sat in the front row. Professor Zenthara and her former conspirators, recently returned from their semester on Earth. They looked different. Professor Zenthara's crystal patterns carried new colors Maya had never seen before. Kreshta's harmonic resonances included notes that sounded almost musical. The Zephyrians moved with a new independence, having learned to function as individuals as well as hive mind components. Diversity, Maya said from the podium, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, is not contamination. It is innovation. It is the source of solutions that no single mind, no matter how advanced, could conceive alone. She gestured to the returned exchange students. These individuals learned something important during their time on Earth. They learned that humans don't succeed despite our differences from other species, but because of them. Our chaotic creativity, our emotional decision-making, our stubborn refusal to accept limitations, These aren't bugs in our programming. They're features. Professor Xanthara stood up, her crystal form chiming with harmonics Maya now recognized as humility. Miss Chun, might I address the assembly? Maya stepped aside, giving her former would-be killer the podium. When I first encountered humanity, Professor Xanthara began, I saw only chaos where I expected order, emotion where I demanded logic, creativity where I preferred calculation. I concluded that such differences were dangerous to galactic civilization. Her crystalline patterns shifted to colors that indicated deep reflection. I was correct about the danger. Human thinking is dangerous to established systems. But I was wrong about the nature of that danger. Humans don't threaten civilization by destroying what we have built. They threaten our limitations by showing us what we could build instead. The professor looked directly at Maya. During my time on Earth, I observed human children solving problems through play that would challenge our greatest scholars. I watched human artists create beauty from materials we would consider worthless. I saw human scientists approach questions in ways that violated every principle of logical investigation, yet somehow produced profound insights. Kreshta stood next, her harmonic resonance filling the hall with complex melodies. I shared living space with a human family. I observed their interactions, their conflicts, their methods of resolution. They taught me that logical perfection is not the only form of intelligence. Sometimes, the most elegant solution comes from accepting imperfection and working with it rather than against it. One by one, the former conspirators stood to share what they had learned. Each spoke of specific human capabilities that had challenged their assumptions about intelligence, creativity, and problem-solving. When they finished, Dean Vorthik took the podium. His scales had settled into deep, thoughtful blues and greens. The Academy's new motto, he announced, proposed by Miss Chun and adopted by unanimous council vote, will be, in diversity, we find solutions that no single mind could conceive. The graduation ceremony concluded with something unprecedented in the Academy's 500-year history, a standing ovation for a first-year student. But more importantly, it concluded with the beginning of new exchange programs, new collaborative research projects, and new ways of thinking about what intelligence could look like. Maya found herself surrounded by classmates who had previously ignored or dismissed her. They asked questions about human methods, requested study partnerships, and invited her to join research groups. The change wasn't complete, and there were still those who viewed human participation with suspicion. But something fundamental had shifted, as Maya packed her belongings to return to Earth for summer break. Kreshta approached her.